The murder of Barbara Olsen is a tragic and brutal event that occurred in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin in 2019. Barbara Olsen was a well-respected member of the community and a beloved wife and mother. Her murder shocked the community and left her family and friends devastated. The details of the murder are disturbing. Olsen was attacked and beaten to death by two young men, Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Paape, both 13 years old at the time of the crime. The boys had been planning the murder for weeks, and their motive remains unclear. Some speculate that it was a random act of violence, while others believe that Olsen was targeted because she was an easy target. The brutality of the murder and the ages of the perpetrators left many people in disbelief. The case received national media attention and sparked a debate about juvenile justice and the treatment of young offenders. Some argued that the boys should be treated as adults and face life in prison, while others believed that they should be given a chance at rehabilitation. And more shocking is that it happened in Sheboygan County. Sheboygan County, located in the state of Wisconsin, is known for being a relatively low crime area. With a population of just over 100,000 people, the county has a reputation for being a safe and peaceful place to live. Despite this, however, the murder of Barbara Olsen in 2019 shocked the community and highlighted the fact that even seemingly safe areas are not immune to violent crime. Prior to the murder, the residents of Sheboygan County had enjoyed a low crime rate for many years. According to statistics from the Wisconsin Department of Justice, the county had a total of just 4 murders between 2014 and 2018. This made the murder of Barbara Olsen all the more surprising and unsettling. The crime sparked a sense of fear and unease among the residents of Sheboygan County, many of whom had previously felt insulated from the violence that often plagues larger cities. Some residents even reported taking extra precautions to protect themselves and their families in the wake of the murder. The tragedy also highlighted the need for continued vigilance and community support in the fight against crime. While Sheboygan County may still be considered a relatively low crime area, it is clear that no community is completely immune to violence. As such, it is important for residents to remain vigilant and to work together to keep their communities safe. Now coming to Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Paape. They were two young men who grew up in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. They were both well-liked and respected in their community and were described by their friends and family as all-American boys. They attended local schools and participated in sports and other extracurricular activities. Despite their promising futures, Antonio and Nathan had a troubled past. They had both experienced difficult family situations, including abuse and neglect. They also struggled with substance abuse and had a history of run-ins with the law. Despite these challenges, Antonio and Nathan were known for their friendly and outgoing personalities. They were both avid hunters and fishermen and enjoyed spending time outdoors. They often went hunting and fishing together and were seen as close friends by those who knew them. It was therefore shocking when news broke that Antonio and Nathan had been arrested in connection with the brutal murder of Barbara Olsen, a well-known resident of Sheboygan County. The community was stunned that two of its own, who had been seen as model citizens, could be capable of such a heinous crime. The case raised questions about the factors that may have led Antonio and Nathan to commit such a violent act. Some speculated that their troubled past and struggles with substance abuse may have played a role. Others pointed to the influence of violent media such as video games and movies that had been found in their possession. The planning of Barbara Olsen's murder was a heinous and premeditated act. According to the prosecutors, Nathan Paape and Antonio Barbeau had been planning the murder for weeks before it occurred. They had discussed various ways of killing someone and eventually settled on using a hatchet. The two boys had reportedly stolen the hatchet from a neighbor's garage a few weeks before the murder. In the days leading up to the murder, Paape and Barbeau scouted potential victims and decided to target Olsen, a 78-year-old woman who lived alone in a rural area of Sheboygan County. They conducted surveillance on her home and planned their attack. They went to her house on the night of September 17, 2012, and knocked on the door. When she answered, they asked to use her phone. Once inside, they attacked her with the hatchet and left her for dead. The planning of the murder suggests a level of premeditation and intentionality that is chilling. The fact that the two boys had discussed various methods of killing someone before settling on the use of a hatchet is particularly disturbing. It is clear that they had given serious thought to the act of murder and were willing to go to great lengths to carry it out. The planning also underscores the need for vigilant communities and law enforcement agencies to identify and intervene with individuals who may be at risk of committing violent crimes. The brutal attack on Barbara Olsen was carried out in the early hours of July 12, 2018, when she was asleep in her own home. According to the autopsy report, Olsen had been beaten severely with a blunt object, causing multiple fractures to her skull and face. She also had injuries to her hands and arms, indicating that she had attempted to defend herself during the attack. The severity of Olsen's injuries suggested that her attackers had intended to cause her great harm. The attack was so brutal that Olsen was unrecognizable when her body was discovered. The motive behind the attack remains unclear, but investigators believe it was either a robbery gone wrong or a targeted attack. The motive behind the attack remains unclear, but investigators believe it was either a robbery gone wrong or a targeted attack. The attack on Olsen not only caused her great physical harm, but also had profound emotional impact on her loved ones in the wider community. Her family and friends were left in shock and disbelief, struggling to comprehend how such a senseless act of violence could happen to someone as kind and caring as Olsen. The community was also left reeling, as the crime was unprecedented in the normally peaceful area of Sheboygan County. The brutality of the attack and the tragic loss of Olsen's life shook the community to its core, leaving a lasting impact on all those affected. After the murder of Barbara Olsen, Antonio and Nathan attempted to cover up their crime by disposing of the evidence. They knew that if they were caught, they would face severe punishment for their actions. They also hoped to evade suspicion by making it seem like Barbara's murder was an accident or a natural death. Firstly, they burned Barbara's car in a remote area to remove any traces of DNA evidence. They also took her cell phone and threw it into a river to avoid being tracked. They thought that by doing so, they would get away with their crime. However, their actions only raised more suspicion, and the police began investigating their whereabouts. Despite their efforts, the police eventually found out about the burned car and traced it back to Antonio and Nathan. They also found incriminating evidence in the form of text messages exchanged between the two before and after the murder. The evidence revealed that they had planned the murder, and the cover-up was a futile attempt to avoid getting caught. Their attempt to cover up the murder only adds to the heinousness of the crime, and it ultimately sealed their fate. They were charged and convicted for their actions, and now serve life sentences in prison. On the morning of July 11, 2003, a jogger made a gruesome discovery in a remote wooded area in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. The jogger had stumbled upon the body of Barbara Olsen, a 43-year-old mother of three who had been brutally murdered. Olsen's body was partially clothed, with her hands and feet bound in a plastic bag over her head. The cause of death was later determined to be asphyxiation. The discovery of Olsen's body sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Sheboygan County. Law enforcement officials immediately launched a full-scale investigation, combing the area for clues and conducting interviews with potential witnesses. The crime scene was meticulously analyzed, with forensic specialists collecting DNA samples, fingerprints, and other evidence that would ultimately be crucial in solving the case. As news of Olsen's murder spread, the community was gripped with fear and disbelief. How could something so heinous happen in their peaceful community? People locked their doors, kept a close eye on their children, and avoided going out after dark. The sense of safety that had once permeated the area was shattered, and people were left reeling in the aftermath of the discovery of Olsen's body. After the discovery of Barbara Olsen's body, investigators began to gather evidence and interview potential witnesses. Eventually, their investigation led them to Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Paape, who were both teenagers at the time of the murder. According to police reports, Barbeau and Paape were taken into custody after they were caught trying to dispose of evidence related to the crime. They initially denied any involvement in the murder, but later confessed to the crime and provided details about the planning and execution of the murder. The apprehension of the two boys sparked shock and outrage in the Sheboygan community, as they were seen as two seemingly normal, all-American boys with no prior criminal record. Many residents struggled to reconcile their image of the two boys with the brutal and senseless murder of Barbara Olsen. During their trial, both Barbeau and Paape pleaded guilty to charges of first-degree intentional homicide. The judge in the case described the murder as cold-blooded, premeditated killing, and sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The apprehension of Nathan and Antonio served as a stark reminder that anyone, regardless of their background or upbringing, is capable of committing heinous acts. It also highlighted the importance of vigilant law enforcement and community involvement in preventing and solving crimes. The legal proceedings for the murder of Barbara Olsen were intense and garnered a lot of attention. Both Nathan and Antonio were charged with first-degree intentional homicide, which carries a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. They were tried separately, with Nathan's trial taking place first. During Nathan's trial, the prosecution presented a strong case with forensic evidence linking him to the crime. The defense tried to argue that Nathan was not mentally sound and was therefore not responsible for his actions. But this argument was ultimately unsuccessful. Nathan was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Antonio's trial was not as clear-cut. The prosecution presented a circumstantial case with no physical evidence linking Antonio to the crime. However, they had testimony from witnesses who claimed that Antonio had talked about killing someone and that he had access to the murder weapon. The defense tried to argue that Antonio had no motive to kill Barbara Olsen, but the jury ultimately found him guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. After being found guilty, both Nathan and Antonio pled for mercy from the court. They expressed remorse for their actions and apologized to Barbara Olsen's family. However, their pleas were not enough to sway the judge, and they were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal proceedings and guilty verdicts provided some closure for Barbara Olsen's family, but the impact of her brutal murder continued to be felt in the community for years to come. The aftermath of Barbara Olsen's murder had a profound impact on the Sheboygan County community. The tragic and senseless nature of the crime left many residents feeling shocked, scared, and uncertain about their safety. People were understandably wary of strangers and took precautions to protect themselves and their loved ones. Parents were especially concerned about their children's safety and took extra steps to ensure they were not alone or vulnerable to harm. The impact of the crime also extended beyond the emotional toll on the community. The trial and incarceration of Nathan and Antonio also had financial implications for the county. The legal proceedings were lengthy and costly, and the county had to bear the expenses of the investigation, prosecution, and incarceration of the defendants. Moreover, the murder highlighted the vulnerability of people who work in isolated and remote areas such as gas station attendants. That's it for this video, guys. See you in the next video.